All right, well, Moncton, right? Moncton.
You got it.
All right, now, you know where the name came from, Gene? This is a bit of a test.
I don't know where I have no idea where the name came.
I didn't either, but I learned. That's what I studied it. It comes, the Milwaukee Railroad, who first sort of developed it in 1906 to help bring their railroad over the Snoqualmie Pass in 1907. They named it after a railroad town in New Brunswick.
Wow.
Isn't that sweet? It's about a town of about 40,000 people at that time. I don't think it was much of a town at all before that. I think it really developed in order to help build the railroad, to help bring it over the pass. And then when the railroad got over the pass in 1907, by that time, the town already had a generating plant just around the corner on the Cedar River that was processing the electricity that it got from the head on a dam that was a little ways upstream. And that was the first dam for generating electricity that any municipality in the United States had done. We did it. Seattle did it. I think it was 1902 when it was okay to go ahead and do it. Our first dam on that river was not upstream from Moncton, but downstream at Landsberg, and it's still there. That's where we get our water, our Cedar River water, which we've had since, I think, January 1901 is when that gravity system, you know, it goes all, there's no pumps working. It's just like 500 feet higher than the waterfront, but it only needed to be a couple hundred feet higher to be able to get it up into the reservoirs on Beacon Hill and Volunteer Park, you know, the two, Volunteer Park, and then the one down on Pike, which was, what was it called? Getting pitiful with my memory. So that was the idea of R.H. Thompson, to do that. He was a sensible city engineer. And then his next idea was the electric thing. First, water, solve the water problem, get a good quantity of water into Seattle, and do it sensibly with a gravity system. The next one was electricity. And his big competitor there was Puget Power. And they had built the first private generating plant for electricity, for what would you call it, hydroelectric plant, and that was the Snoqualmie Falls, which is still there, I think still working. It's, you know, carved out of rock beneath the falls. They opened that in '98. So we got our electricity 4 years later because, again, R.H. Thompson's work, and also James Ross, J.D. Ross, who he hired to be the manager. And J.D. Ross went on up and up until he was running Bonneville Power in the late 30s, and then he died. He became a friend of FDR. FDR appointed him all these higher positions.
Hence Ross Lake and Ross Dam.
Yeah, Ross Lake and Ross Dam. And one of his principal helpers was Chester Morris, hence Chester Morris Lake, which was the old Cedar Lake. It's kind of a wonderful story, how complicated it is and how much it involves the struggle between power and private power and water supply too. And it has these larger than life characters like R.H. Thompson and James Ross involved.
Was there a Seattle equivalent of Chinatown? Did we battle over the water and were there political and financial struggles over water in the way that Los Angeles? Do we have that in our history?
Your point. I didn't mean the movie Chinatown.
The movie Chinatown.
Yeah. There was, yes. Good point. This was in the 90s, after the city burned down and the private company, the Spring Hill company that ran water to Seattle homes out of basically springs that were on First Hill, when that did a lousy job in protecting the city decided, R.H. Thompson was involved in this very much, that they should have their own water system. And they got the citizens to agree. And then in '95, they won a most important legal, well, they didn't do it, it was in Spokane. Spokane won the right to pay for building systems like that with revenue bonds. In other words, expected income from selling water and electricity to your citizens. So public power could be financed in speculation by what people were going to pay for it, which happened. And that's how they were able to build these things, with revenue bonds. They didn't have to just go get the money and borrow it from some other fund. They could speculate. And it worked very well.
Where did the water actually, I mean, did it run around the north side of the lake? How did it cross into Seattle from?
That came on big, big pipes that were wooden staves wrapped with iron bands. And they came right down from where the intake was at Landsberg. That was about 570 feet above, elevation. I think I mentioned that. So it had to come down from there, and it was a gravity system. That means, of course, it can go downhill, but because it's got a head and the beginning is higher, it can go over hills,
Right.
as long as it doesn't have to go over too much of a hill. And that's what it did.
So what was the route? Did it go south of the lake?
Oh, it went through Renton.
Okay.
And then it climbed up onto Beacon Hill, the ridge that goes on and on and on. It went up that ridge. And then it went to...
All the way to Volunteer Park?
All the way to First Hill and Volunteer Park, yeah. Yeah, and there's some pretty good photographs of that. We can put some of that up. And it got to the Volunteer Park Reservoir, and in other words, system began in January of 9001. And it was tested in December of 1900 and found to work wonderfully. And then they started to route it over to a top of Queen Anne Hill, and then out to the north end. Took it across Lake Union, where Latona was, and I guess still is, near where I live, Wallingford.
And that 570 feet was enough?
Yes.
To carry all that?
Well, actually, you didn't need that 570 feet, because that 570 feet got it up to Volunteer Park. That was the high reservoir, and that was enough to get it to Wallingford and to get it to Ballard and to get it ultimately to Ballard. But after Ballard agreed to enter the city in 1907, because someone found a dead horse in its water supply. That was one of the good reasons Ballard joined Seattle.
Now, the dead horse sounds like Chinatown.
It might sound like Chinatown. Yeah, maybe it was put there.
The dead horse ends up on some Ballard council person's pillow and the bottom. Okay, sorry.
Good point. Yeah. I think you can go further than that. It might be that the dead horse may have just been reported and never was a dead horse, maybe, Oh yeah, we got rid of the dead horse, but it was last night, yeah. So I mean, there's people that doubt there ever was a dead horse because there's so little information about it. It's like a legend.
Well, these are fascinating stories, but now tell us about, in 1915, the Masonry Earth Dam.
Okay, well, good story that is. 1914, Seattle built the Masonry Dam, which is what, I think 200 and some feet high. It's an ugly thing. It really looks like the devil. It looks like hell. We'll show some pictures of it. And but they built it, and it was not at the western end of Chester Morse Lake, but they left room between the end of Chester Morse Lake where the old dam was for electricity, and they put up the snow ones, which would flood the old location a little bit, and they would get enough head with a much bigger pond that they could then generate, the gravity, the head they call it, to run, maybe 8 miles downstream, or less than that actually, because that's the power plant that was where? At Moncton. That was what ran and the power plant for the first dam was also at Moncton. But we can show pictures of that. Here's a picture of the power plant at Moncton. Okay, and then so they got that going in 1914, and within a year, they were from filling up the pool
behind
the reservoir
dam.
Behind the dam. They discovered that water was encouraging when it was already happening. That is, at the springs, in that distance between that new pool and Rattlesnake Lake in Moncton, which was only about 4 miles, or no, it's less than that. I'm sorry, I used to know these figures, but it was seeping through, and lifting Rattlesnake Lake up. They discovered that in, well, I think it was late April of 1915, and it was going up about 1.5 feet a day. And in all, by the time it stopped going up, it had gone up about 25 feet and had drowned the town with the exception of about 4 structures, including I think an old hotel that was up the hill a little bit, and that had flooded the first floor, but they had moved everything from the first floor up to the second floor. And
now there's a wonderful photo that we I think we have in the book we did together of Moncton half flooded. And so you have this marvelous kind of reflective palette where the eaves of the town are reflected in the water, and as the water's rising in 1915.
Yeah, well, there might be a couple more of the town before and after the flood. We got a picture of the town's railroad station. Also the picture, remember the town had several names. It had Cedar Falls. R.H. Thompson got the railroad to agree to change the name from Moncton to Cedar Falls. So sometimes it was called Rattlesnake Lake. Now, why was it called Rattlesnake Lake?
Well, I do know. That's an interesting story.
Tell me.
Well, actually, let's have the kids tell you.
I know that you took your class, what was it? It was your 6th graders, I think?
5th and 6th.
5th and 6th graders to Rattlesnake Lake. And they explored the wreckage of the town and enjoyed the stumps and searched for rattlesnakes. Kids?
Now, when you guys got there, can anyone describe, or several of you, describe what you saw as we came over the hill?
Well, there was a lot of tree stumps and like bricks and stuff laying around from like chimneys, and there was like foundations.
There was a lot of mud and stuff from where the water had dried up.
I think you guys got pretty muddy, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
There was lots of glass bottles laying everywhere. The remains of glass bottles.
Are they talking?
Yeah, they're talking now.
Okay.
On the lake bed, there were old foundations of houses. And there was even a broken down chimney.
Interesting. I think, I have a picture of that, and I think it's you and Bailey standing around this chimney.
There was like the sand, and it looked like it was cracked, but it was really hard. We could walk on it and stuff. We didn't sink into it, and it was like really hard. And they could like pick it up, and they could like crack it, and it wouldn't the rest of it wouldn't break.
And why would it be called Rattlesnake Lake if there wasn't even a single rattlesnake?
There is a ridge behind the lake that is called Rattlesnake Ridge.
So Rattlesnake Ridge is behind the lake, and why might it have been called Rattlesnake Ridge? Does anyone know that?
Maybe the top is kind of swivelly.
It looks sort of snake-like, you're thinking, that the ridge itself looks snake-like.
Yeah, so it's kind of like what you said, there's like these seed pods, and there are seeds inside of them, and when they blow around, they should make a shaking noise like rattlesnakes, like with their tail.
Right.
Well, the explanation that I read, which didn't convince me at all, was that in the 1870s, some military campaign came through by the lake, and they had a lot of hay in there that they were for their horses, and the hay carried, somehow they knew, 3 rattlesnakes that escaped, and hence the lake got the name because they slithered off onto the banks of the lake.
Fun fact, did you know that rattlesnakes, on the end of their tail, the ring, each ring represents how old they are, kind of like trees with the rings?
Did you know that there are bugs that ate your hair?
Fun fact, nobody exactly died when Moncton flooded.
At some point, the city wakes up, not the city council, but Thompson. He says, look, we gotta blow a hole in that dam and get water out of there, because that's what's really doing it, is this dam. The city never admitted it, really. What the city did is they bought up the town on the excuse that it was gonna pollute the Seattle's water, system.
Right.
And so everybody got paid, basically, that lost property. But so they blew a hole in the dam, drained the water out, and the water then drained out of Rattlesnake Lake. And by By June, it was going down quickly, about as quickly as it came up. And then in August, they cleaned it up. And then soon after that, a year after that, the city bought the whole thing.
And then just let the lake fill up again too.
Yeah, that's right. They plugged the hole. They plugged the hole. Now, but there was one other thing was the Boxley blowout. They plugged the hole, the water went up again, and they had a big rain. This was in 1918. So this 3 years later, the reservoir filled up, and now this time it not simply seeped, it blew open. And it didn't go into Rainbow Lake. No, what's the name of our lake? Scarecrow Lake? No, Rattlesnake Lake. It didn't go to Rattlesnake Lake or Moncton. It went down its own creek because it happened right at Christmas time. It went down Christmas Creek, they called it, and joined with Boxley Creek, and they called it the Boxley Blowout. And Boxley automatically then became 500 feet wide, 10 feet deep, wiped out a town, Selvage, I think. I can't remember the name of it. It's right down in the valley. It was a lumber town, but it wiped it out. Nobody was killed, though. And R.H. Thompson learned about this soon after he got a letter from the federal government saying that, yes, you can develop the Skagit River. And you're right that Puget Power, although they had the rights to do it, weren't doing anything, and they were tying up everything. We'll give it to you. So that was the same time that they lost the electrical energy making, from the lake there at Chester Morris. They got the Skagit River, and of course that's been the real...
And that's the history from that point forward.
Yes, that's right.
Seattle City Light and all the lakes and the dams up.
So I'm about halfway through. That'll be enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So shall we...
Yeah. Well, what, Gene? Huh?
Well, shall we stop right here?
We could, yeah.
Well, okay.
I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said. Let me check my notes. Oh, that's a good story. Oh, that was really rich. But now I don't think we should take the time.
Okay.
Well, that's it for today. Good night.
Goodbye.
You're reporting from outside.
Enough?
Yeah.
Bye.